The insult follows a dispute between two working-class men in Lebanon, Tony, a Christian Lebanese mechanic, and Yasser, a Palestinian refugee currently working as a foreman. The incident begins with Tony accidentally spilling water from an illegal pipe onto his balcony onto Yasser, and Yasser actually offers to fix it for Tony. However, Tony, upon hearing the Palestinian accent of Yasser, wants nothing to do with him and later destroys the work of Yasser's men outside. In response, Yasser yells at Tony he is an effing prick. This dispute is caused by the underlying tension with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, leading to prejudice towards refugees, especially religiously fueled. This is further fueled by Tony's traumatic past with Palestinians in the destruction of his hometown of Dammur. So why did this dispute escalate? Well, instead of apologizing, Yasser ends up being provoked by Tony to punch him. There are two reasons as to why this happened. Yasser's boss Talal tries to mediate the issue. He tries to resolve their differences and get each other to see the respective opposite side. However, as we will discuss later, Talal is an interested party in the dispute for business and legality purposes, and he was clearly trying to avoid issues for himself. We see this as when he tries to circumvent the two parties of interest by appealing to Tony's wife, which ultimately backfires. Talal also initiates the final meeting of parties in a biased environment with racist propaganda heard over the TV, which later influences Yasser's escalation and prime Tony to be malicious. This emphasizes the importance of being neutral as a mediator and having a neutral environment. Lastly, both men are both very prideful and for the most of the movie refuse to back down or admit any part of being in the wrong. This is a key part of being resolving conflict. We can see in the movie an unresolved dispute not only impacts the two parties but also the people around them. We see three main categories of this. The interests. Yasser and Tony want to live an ordinary working life. However, as a result of the dispute, Tony was unable to work due to injury and Yasser later gets fired from his job. Talal, the boss, was invested in the issue with years worth of contracts lined up. However, lawsuits might jeopardize this, so he tries to resolve the conflict. And lastly, the president at one point even has to interject and appeal to both of them to resolve their differences due to the rioting across the country. Secondly, there was power. Yasser was arrested, taking away his power to exert control over himself, and as the litigation progressed, their internal argument reached the entire country, which was way out of their scope of control, leading to riots and whatnot. And lastly, the riots. RIGHTS. So the right for safety was breached multiple times. As stated before, the whole country of Lebanon was primed by the litigation, leading to riots and vandalism. Both men at different points assaulted one another, as well as Tony's group being responsible for a motorcycle accident later in the movie, and Serene had her child prematurely as a result of the stress from the dispute. Lastly, there's the right for privacy. The entire group's life was put on display to the rest of the world, and secondly, both parties had their traumatic past due to the war brought up against their will. Lastly, we have what we would kind of suggest to, in terms of dispute resolution techniques, what could we have used to prevent this kind of escalation to the litigation level? Well, I believe mediation is the best possible choice, although it is disputable. While the dispute was started with anger and pride, it was continued and fueled throughout by the lack of understanding of both sides. Through mediation in a neutral environment where both men could speak as equals and have their voice equally heard, both parties might have been able to see their respective sides. We see a potential for this towards the end of the litigation period, when both begin to see somewhat more eye to eye. Once understanding is established between the two parties, a mediator can begin to work something out together and compromise to reach an agreement. If things do take a similar track then to the previous movie, then a buffer might be needed. However, a facilitator might also be needed if the decision is not reached within a reasonable time period. Lastly, depending on the agreement made, an administrator may be used for implementation purposes to ensure both parties are following the agreement. Thank you for listening. Cheers.